Hello quilty friends and welcome back to my channel. My name's Rachel and I make videos about quilting and my creative life. Anywhere that you can find me on the web is listed down in the description box below, including exclusive content over on my Patreon channel. I'm really excited to share with you my latest quilt that I've been making because it's an optical illusion quilt where it looks like there's curves and circles when you look at the quilt, but it's actually not. It's just an optical illusion and a trick of the mind. So the quilt is made up of two very simple and very similar blocks. So they're called kaleidoscope blocks. And they're two very similar blocks and you just put them together in a alternating fashion, and then the row below alternates and then it forms a circle pattern. It's one of those where I've laid out a few and I couldn't see the pattern forming yet, so I think you do need a large expanse of the blocks to be able to get the optical illusion, but I'm really excited. So I've made all of the actual blocks. The quilt pattern has a border on it as well, so I need to make the border, which is also foundation paper pieced, which these are. I've left all of the papers in. I just need to make the border and then I can get joining everything together, which I'm really excited about. I just want to see the pattern start to show. Now, the quilt pattern is by a company called Cosmos Quilts over on Etsy. I'll leave a link to the pattern in the description. There was a little bit of a discount off the pattern when I bought it, and I definitely really recommend the pattern because not only does it come with the foundation paper piece templates, but unlike a lot of patterns, it then comes with a written pattern as well, giving you lots of in-depth information. It does assume that you've done foundation paper piecing before, but it really does help with lots of information on the quilt, because lots of foundation paper pieced patterns will just be the pattern for the block and it's very limited instructions, but this one I really recommend. So I'll leave the details for that so you can check it out as well. The fabric that I'm using is Laurie Holt B Cross for the blues. I've got 5 different colours of blues, teals and greens. That one's definitely a green. This one could be a dark teal, but I'm just going to go with blues and greens. And then the backgrounds, we've just got B backgrounds by Laurie Holt, and I've just done those scrappy as well, but they're all in the teal colourway. So here's another example. I just absolutely love those background fabrics. So let's get on and make the border and then we'll see the whole quilt starting to come together. I hope you're as excited as I am. So I've finished piecing all of the blocks now. Obviously the border, I need to cut out solid fabric for the border, so I'll do that once everything is pieced together. The border pieces still need trimming down, so just be aware of that if you do this pattern, the cutting instructions for mainly the centre of these diamonds is really wasteful. So do one first with the cutting instructions that they suggest and then modify them, because I've feel that I could have cut the pieces smaller and a little bit better, but the pattern is still brilliant. So now I need to join the pieces together, and as you know, I've got this design board here behind me where I usually put all of my quilts out, and I also use it as a bit of a display board really to keep the quilts up that I'm really enjoying. So I would usually take this down, put them all up, but I've decided that because it is such a simple layout, and I do find it hard to recognise when I've put a piece wrong. If you followed me, you'll know that I do that all the time. So I'm not actually going to put them up on the board. I'm just going to have them in 2 piles next to the sewing machine, pick block 1 and block 2 up, sew it together and just do it like that. It's a 7x9 design, so it should come together fairly quick. But yeah, I just know that if I put it up on the board, I won't be able to spot if there's a mistake, whereas if I'm doing it this way, I should be okay. Famous last words. Yes, I'll try and plan it out so that I'm doing it correctly. And also they won't stick to the board because I've still got the papers in. But the main reason being is I know that I'll put something wrong if I put it up on the board. I'm just duplicating my work, aren't I? So here we go then. I'm not sure which block that is. Block 1 and then block 2. So I'll just keep them there and I'll just pull from them. Obviously each row then needs to be alternated. So let's just hope that I get it right, because otherwise I think if a piece is out of place, you won't get the full effect, I don't think. So it's a challenge for me. Oh yes, another reason why I've decided not to put it up on the design board, because I've only got 5 fabrics, so I don't need to worry about whether there's going to be similar fabrics next to each other, because I've only got 5 fabrics that are going to be similar fabrics next to each other, or the same fabrics. Even in these blocks where there's 4 fabrics, 4 of the pattern fabrics, there's some of the same because I've only got 5. You know, it was a really hard challenge to make sure that I didn't have them matching. So I know that when they go side by side, they are going to have duplicates next to each other, and I'm fine with that. They're very similar anyway in colours. Here's my first row, and one thing that I do like to do with foundation paper piecing is remove my paper from the seam before I sew it again, because otherwise it becomes really hard to then remove this thin strip of paper. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this as I'm doing the rows, because then when I come to join it across here, it'll be hard to get the papers out. So I'm just going to make my life a tiny bit easier in the long run. It is a bit more annoying now, but I'm just going to remove these as I'm sewing them, because you see, like here for example, had I have still got the paper on the back there, because I've sewn over the seam, it would make it really hard to get the paper out. And I mean, you can remove the block paper completely before you start joining them, but I like to just remove them once the blocks are joined in terms of all of this. So let's have a look. Ta-da! It also helps you prevent from seeing the stitches, because you're not stretching the stitches over all of the papers. But you see what I mean? I think those two are the same, but that one's very similar anyway, so no, those two are different. Very slightly different. So yeah, I'm just going to start joining, and on the back it does say what block number it is. So this is block 2, so I know I need to put block 1 here. So there we go, very slightly alternating. There's not a lot in it at all. All of the rows are now sewn together. It was a little cumbersome with all the papers. I just need to join the rows together now. They're just joined because I chain pieced it how I normally do. Yes, with all the papers it was more cumbersome than a normal quilt, which can be difficult as well, can't it? I only made a mistake with the design twice, but luckily I caught it, and both times it was on the last row. So when you're piecing them together, it literally says on the back of the block 1 and block 2. If I had removed the papers before joining them together, I wouldn't have even known that I made those mistakes. So I am really glad that I did keep the papers in. But yeah, I'm not looking forward to removing them. Is this a mistake? I'm not sure. I am tempted, because my mum says that she would like this quilt. I'll show it to her when it's finished, well, when the quilt top's finished, and I might ask her to come and help remove the papers. We'll have to see about that one. So I'm just going to remove like I was, just in between the rows. But when I did realise that I'd made the mistakes, I actually had to lay the quilt out. I'd only done maybe 5 rows, I think, at that point. So I had to lay it out so I could have a look where the mistake was and make sure it wasn't going further up the quilt. and you could see the optical illusions of the circles starting to come together. So I was happy with that, because when I put it down before, I'd only done, I think, maybe 9 blocks, and you couldn't really see it. So I was glad of that, and I'm excited to show you. So I've got the diagram. So last night I decided the papers were driving me insane. I needed to remove the papers. Because I'd removed the papers from the seams, the subsequent papers that were no longer attached to any of the papers were then coming out. So I was just like, wow, I just need to remove them all. I thought in my mind when I started removing them, I thought I've made a big mistake. It's going to take me absolutely ages to remove all of these papers. But it didn't. It went fairly quickly. My partner was cooking dinner. I removed about half of them in that time. And then we just sat down and watched some Netflix, and I removed the rest. So it's all now nice and manageable, flexible, back to being a regular quilt. So it'll be so much easier to attach the borders, because those was not going to be fun. There was one area that I noticed, yes, here, that I've barely caught the seam on one of the blocks. I noticed because the points was way off, like really far apart, rather than having cut them off. So I looked at the seams on the back, and I just need to seam rip this block so I can adjust it, just because I'm not sure how long that seam would last, otherwise it looks like it would fray back. So I've just marked it with a pin. And there was somewhere else on the edge where I had actually caught the fabric. Here, you won't be able to tell how it's happened, but here I've just caught the fabric, so I need to seam rip that back and line it up properly, because when you're joining with the papers, you don't always necessarily notice if it's gone pushed backwards, because the paper's over the top of it covering it. I haven't been 100% perfect when removing the papers, the odd little bit left in the point. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to iron the quilt, because I haven't ironed it yet. Because when you join the blocks and things, you don't necessarily need to iron it when you've got the papers there. Well, that's what I tell myself. Perhaps I would get better points if I did iron them apart. But the papers is a really accurate way of doing blocks and things. So that's the main reason why I enjoy foundation paper piecing. You can achieve quite complex shapes, but it's fairly easy to piece it all together. So what I'm going to do now then is just rectify those bits that I need to. Oh, I've got one last paper that I needed to remove. I left it in here so I could show you how I remove the papers and some tricks. So a couple of tips then for removing the papers. You can see what I mean here. Because I've removed this seam, this paper just wants to come loose, so that's easy enough to remove. And then the next one will still be caught by the seam, so you might have to just pull or something, and they'll generally come apart because you will have handled the papers so much they're just hanging on by a thread. Now I just use regular printer paper. The cheaper paper the better, because then that tends to be thinner paper, so that's a good tip. Just don't splash out on expensive paper. You can get special paper for foundation paper piecing that you can put in your own printer, but I've never done that. Might be worth trying it out in the future. So I've got a pair of scissors here, and what I sometimes do if my hands are getting tired or I can't get in somewhere, the scissors are closed. You can also use a crochet hook. I've actually gone under the fabric there. But you can use the scissors to make holes and rip out small bits like here. You can use that to help rip out a small bit. Another tip that I found, these quilting gloves. I've bought these quilting gloves and they're filthy now. just with all of the ink from the papers, so I'm going to have to try and give them a wash. But these are really good for removing papers because you can really grip everything and it will reduce hand strain. Everything is just easier with these gloves, and that's all I do. So then once you've removed the big bit, these small bits will start coming out. And yep, the gloves make it really nice and quick. They're just regular quilting gloves that I've bought recently. This is the first project that I've used them on and they've gone all discoloured, so I'm worried about using them to actually quilt with because that ink that's on the gloves might transfer onto the white fabric on the front, so I'll just try and wash them first, I think. So here in this corner seam, I've got quite a bit folded in there, so I'll just do my best to get it out. I might need to use something to pry it out with. And this is why I like to remove the paper from the seams before joining. It would just alleviate that happening on every intersection. And with foundation paper piecing, I do like to shorten my stitch length because it makes it easier for removing the papers, and it will also just mean the stitches are a little bit more secure when you're putting this almost pressure on them to remove the papers. Just make it a little bit stronger. So a bit like this, you can use something that's pointy but blunt to try and get everything out. And there we go. Now I've got loads of seams that need pressing and sorting. Well, that was a case of just trying to flatten the seams rather than having them in any type of organised manner like I'd usually like to. It's bad enough when you have 4 intersections coming together with a half square triangle, but this has got 6 all coming together in the middle. And like I said, I pressed the blocks after I finished each block, but once I joined them, I didn't press in between joining them. So yeah, it was more of a challenge. I decided to iron it from the front so that I could get it as flat as possible, because I tried to iron it from the back to begin with and it was just a chaos. So I thought, well, let's just get the seams flat. So I don't know how well it will quilt up, but we'll see when I get to that point. So shall we go out to the garden? I'll hang the quilt up and you can have a look at it, because I feel that this is really one of those designs where you see it from a distance and you really see the beauty of the design. So I'll show you that. I just wonder that when you've got the quilt on a bed, will you see it from far enough away to be able to see the design? So only time will tell on that one, I guess. So over this weekend, I'm going to work on adding the borders. I'm not sure when I'll get it quilted. I don't think I have enough time this weekend to get it quilted because I've got a few things planned, but it won't be far off because, like I said, my mum has said that she likes the quilt, so I want to give that to her. Maybe Mother's Day. Is Mother's Day coming up soon? Kill 2 birds with 1 stone. So I hope you've enjoyed this video and it inspires you to give one of these quilts a go. There's so many different patterns for quilts that form circles without any circles, which I just think is amazing. It really is a true optical illusion, but it is also one of those quilts where you have to trust the process. You have to believe that the pattern is going to appear when you put it all together, because I think I put maybe 6 or 9 blocks together and I was like, I don't see the pattern isn't there. But you have to have it together in a larger scale to really see the pattern. Like I said earlier in the video, I'll leave all of the relevant links down in the description box. And if you'd like to stay up to date with the quilt progress once I've added the borders on, you can follow me over on Instagram. Of course, I will share it there, and I will share the finished quilt in an upcoming video here on YouTube as well. So don't worry about that whenever it gets finished. So let's pop out into the garden and I'll show you the finished main section of the quilt. And until the next time I see you, you take care and happy quilting.